presentador, tiene una sólida y además profunda experiencia en el tema del café verde, el comercio del café verde y sus operaciones. Él ha tenido varios puestos en casas comerciales, cafetaleras y además en varios países productores durante más de 15 años de experiencia también en la industria del tueste. Quisiera darle la más cordial bienvenida para hablar del tema que habíamos previsto para esta tarde, la producción en el este de África, los desafíos y además las historias y buenas prácticas. Quisiera darle la más cordial bienvenida al señor Tim Scharrer.
Is that really me? Okay, that's a funny picture. Muy buenas tardes a todos ustedes. First things first, to the organizing committee of Sinter Café, thank you very much for having me here today. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you today about coffee production in East Africa, about the challenges and the success stories that come with it. When I was asked to do this speech, I started thinking, how can I start? And I said, well, I could start with the romantic story of the origins of coffee. And I could try to transform and transport you all to the lush highlands of Ethiopia. And we would meet the goat herder Kaldi and his herd of goats. And I could tell you about how curious he was when he found out that after eating cherries from a very specific tree, their behavior changed and they became energetic and full of life. So he got very curious. And he was so curious that he then started to take this, to try this cherry himself. And he also transformed and he got energetic, he got very alert, and obviously that is because of the caffeine content of the coffee cherry. And then I thought I could continue talking about romantic stories of how coffee was transported from origin countries into consuming countries. And then I said, you know, I don't do that. Because coffee actually is a very challenging, a very hard, a very brutal business. And the livelihood of many million farmers are at stake every single day. And I think that there are better ways to honor that incredible commitment. And frankly, coffee is so much more than that little anecdote from the highlands of Ethiopia. Shouldn't that work? Ah, there you go. So what is coffee? Coffee is one of the most traded commodities globally. It's a vital export for many developing countries, providing livelihood for millions of farmers. And with the rise of coffee chains and specialty cafes in the 20th and 21st century, coffee has become not just a beverage, but a significant part of urban culture and lifestyle. This is not... Do I need to point this somewhere? Oh, there you go. I don't know. Can somebody... Okay. So from Italian espressos and cappuccinos to Vietnamese iced coffee, Turkish coffee, and American drip brews, coffee is consumed in a variety of ways around the world. And the global coffee industry caters to all of those diverse palates with innovations and with new trends, like cold brew, like nitro, and luckily for all of us, there's a lot of innovation emerging constantly, which keeps this business very much alive. And beyond its commercial value, coffee plays a pivotal role in social interactions in many cultures. It has led to the establishment of many sustainable farming initiatives that put a huge emphasis on responsible sourcing and production methods. And lastly, coffee consumption has been the subject of numerous health studies, and it is proven by now that drinking coffee is associated with many health benefits, including reduced risks of certain diseases. And it is also a source of antioxidants, and it has been linked to improved mental alertness, which brings me back to the beginning of the famous goat herder Kaldi. So, in essence, coffee isn't just a beverage. It's a cultural phenomenon, an economic powerhouse for some, and a struggle and for survival for others. It's a daily ritual for many, and its rich history and global influence makes it a topic of interest, importance, and significance in many different fields, from agriculture to economics, from sociology to gastronomy, just to name a few. So, when we look at East Africa from a helicopter perspective, then there's one thing that actually stands out. The overall production in the region has actually been stable for the last 2 decades. It has always been around 8 to 10% of the global world production, which means it has grown organically with global growth of coffee production. And that in itself is actually quite a success, because if you, for example, look at the Central American coffee production over the same period, the last 2 decades, the participation of this region has shrunken from previously well above 15% to now closer to 11% in the global scheme of things. Most of the coffee grown in East Africa is still Arabica, but as we will see later, there is a clear push by some countries to invest heavily into the Robusta space, and this has helped to see significant production changes in some countries over the last 2 decades. And it is actually my firm belief that that will continue to develop, and it will change the makeup of the coffee produced in the region for the years to come. I also think that this is necessary because we are observing a global shift in mainstream consumer behaviors and demands with a clear preference for bigger Robusta incorporation into the final blends. As you can see, Ethiopia and Uganda have become the regional powerhouses in terms of production, whereas Kenya has been the country that has suffered the most from a reduction in production. Coffee continues to be an important contributor to the regional GDP and the overall export earnings for the regions. And in the global specialty segment, East Africa remains a key player due to the uniqueness of its terroir, its varieties, its processing methods, and not less important, its ability for storytelling. It is also no secret that countries in Africa in general, and specifically in East Africa, have some of the lowest GDP per capita numbers in the world. This is, unfortunately, often synonymous with a coffee farming culture of subsistence, and sadly, it puts a lot of coffee farmers at or even below the poverty line in each of those countries. What is also clear to observe is that there is a very clear correlation between the country's GDP and the importance of coffee as a crucial export revenue earner. And when you look in the global context, the situation actually becomes even more dramatic. Because when you realize that the GDP of the entire African continent is only 2.8% of the world's total GDP, it becomes almost unbelievable when you think at the same time that over 18% of the world's population currently live in Africa. So the time is limited. 30 minutes, and I want to focus on 4 countries today, where I would first like to share some key facts around them, and I would like to start with Kenya. The Kenyan Arabica coffee production has been stabilizing around 800,000 bags per year with very little potential to grow. And as a matter of fact, the coffee growing areas have actually declined over time because the Kenyan economy has progressed, and a lot of that area has been converted into real estate and in some cases into some other food crops. Over 60% of Kenya's coffee production is grown across the central regions of Kiambu, Kirinyaga, Murang'a, and Nyeri, mostly by smallholders with plots less than half a hectare. The cooperative system the cooperative sector is particularly strong in Kenya, and those organizations aggregate and market over 80% of coffee in Kenya, while corporate and individually owned business market the rest. Kenya is one of the few countries left with an auction system, and the Nairobi Coffee Exchange handles over 90% of Kenyan coffees through this auction system. And it is important to note that 7% of all export revenues are coffee related. When you talk about the support by the local Coffee Research Institute, they provide most of the coffee seedlings to farmers. However, and due to a lack of resources, provisioning of those new coffee seedlings has slowed down over the years, and I would describe it, unfortunately, as erratic most of the time. Moving over to Uganda. The Arabica coffee production in Uganda has been relatively stable over the last years, but as you can see, Robusta production has really been accelerating over the last few years. And that is a direct result of the efforts of the Ugandan government and the local coffee authorities. They have implemented and launched various schemes to increase both coffee area and productivity. And one key pillar was to promote increased plantings of better yielding coffee varieties, distributing them free of cost or at a very low cost to the farming communities. And that has contributed very positively to an increase in coffee yield over the last few years. Similar to all other countries in the region, the coffee in Uganda is mostly grown by smallholders on plots, again, with less than 0.4 hectares in size. And farmers in Uganda are increasingly selecting high-value crops like vanilla and cocoa as alternative intercrop options due to their additional earning potential. The intercropping is widely adopted in Uganda by farmers to protect them against production and price shocks. And no news here, coffee exports are a large contributor to the total export revenues of Uganda, which underscores the social importance of coffee in the entire country. Like Uganda, Tanzania also produces both Arabica and Robusta. And very similar to Uganda, Tanzania is also looking at a very aggressive growth strategy in Robusta to support the global growing demand of that variety. And under that strategy, the government has set a goal of providing 20 million new seedlings to farmers every year, beginning with 2021 up to 2025 to boost overall production of Robusta. Looking at the Arabica complex, most of the coffee produced comes from the south and is fully washed. But there is a growing concern and a growing push by the global roasting industry towards a more water-conscious processing method. And once again, a general pattern that is similar in all the countries across the region. The farm size of smallholders in Tanzania is tiny in the global scheme of things, with an average size of less than 0.4 hectares. And like in all other countries that we look at today, coffee continues to be an incredibly important driver for export revenues, and in the case of Tanzania, representing 8% of the total value. So finally, let's have a look at Ethiopia. the famous birthplace of coffee. Ethiopia has, against all odds really, managed to double its production over the last few years. This is a combination of increased farmland and increased productivity alike. The size of the farms is similar to the rest of the region, with an average size less than half a hectare. The only real exception that you see is in the western part of the country, which is the Jimma area, where some larger estates have been established over the last few years. And we talked a lot about the importance of export revenues. Well, in the case of Ethiopia, that number is even more striking. 36% of all export revenues are coffee related, which is by far the highest number in the entire region. So think about for a minute what that means if there's any disruption in the export flow and the revenue that is associated with it, and the immediate and harsh impacts and implications that that has on the entire country and its ability to import necessary consumption goods. And then one other big differentiator, and something quite unique in the world of coffee, is that almost 50% of the total crop is estimated to be consumed internally. And I'm sure that most of you have been part or have at least witnessed one of those famous coffee ceremonies that is seen almost as a national treasure and heritage by a big part of the Ethiopian coffee community. So moving away from the countries and back into the helicopter view, coffee is a significant export commodity for many East African countries, and it plays a crucial role in the economies of those countries, contributing to foreign exchange earnings and providing livelihoods for millions of people. There are, however, quite a few challenges that we need to address, and it could seriously impact the future viability of coffee production. First, there is climate change. East African coffee-producing regions, like so many other regions around the world, are vulnerable to the effects of climate change, which includes erratic rainfall patterns, rising temperatures, and increased incidence of pests and diseases. And as we all know too well, these changes can negatively impact coffee yields and quality. Coffee leaf rust and coffee berry borer are major threats to coffee crops in East Africa. These pests can devastate coffee plantations if not effectively managed. And I don't think I need to tell this audience about the devastation of coffee leaf rust, as you have all experienced this certainly over the last decade or so, and you are very well aware of the disastrous impact that it has on productivity, on the farm itself, and on the livelihood of farmers. Water scarcity is a growing concern in many coffee-producing areas, not only in East Africa. Changes in precipitation patterns and competition for water resources are affecting coffee farming all over the world, but especially in the West Arabica segment. Many coffee farms in East Africa suffer from very low productivity due to factors like aging coffee trees, inadequate farm management techniques, and limited access to modern agricultural technologies. And on top of all of that, more and more roasters are looking for certifications and compliance. Trying to stay relevant and meeting those requirements of certification programs is extremely challenging for smallholder farmers, as non-compliance or lack of certification is impacting their ability to access premium markets. So, ensuring the long-term sustainability of coffee production is an ongoing challenge, especially in the face of all the problems and issues that I have mentioned above. It is also a global challenge and is not limited to East Africa, and therefore it requires a global solution. Addressing these challenges often requires a multifaceted approach, including investment in research and development, climate adaptation strategies, support for farmer training and education, access to finance, and efforts to improve infrastructure and market access. Cross-functional and pre-competitive collaboration among governments, international organizations, coffee industry stakeholders, and farmers is crucial to finding pragmatic, practical, and sustainable solutions to these challenges. And to be very clear, at least in my opinion, this is not for the farming community alone to solve. This, in my mind, has to be a collective effort. As mentioned before, coffee also plays a crucial role in the economies of these countries, contributing to foreign exchange earnings and providing livelihoods for millions of people. And not surprisingly, the economic, social, and political challenges are very serious as well. Limited market access and trade barriers can hinder the export of coffee, affecting the livelihoods of coffee farmers, their families, and their communities. The global coffee market is subject to massive price fluctuations, which can affect the income of coffee producers. And continuously low prices can and will discourage farmers and will lead to abandonment of coffee farms. Many coffee farmers in East Africa have limited access to financial resources, making it difficult to invest in farm improvements, adopt new technologies, or cope with any other unforeseen financial challenge. Attracting younger generation to coffee farming is a challenge in many East African countries. Farming is often seen as labor-intensive with uncertain financial returns, and younger generations moving to the city to find office jobs is a frequent phenomenon all over the developing world. Add to that inadequate farm infrastructure and post-harvest processing facilities that can lead to inefficiencies in the coffee supply chain, resulting in lower quality coffee, limited market access, lower prices, and ultimately lower revenue. And lastly, political instability and conflicts in coffee-producing regions can disrupt supply chains, leading to reduced production and the displacement of coffee farmers. However, at least in my opinion, the biggest imminent threat to the region is the upcoming EUDR regulation, which will probably shut a lot of coffee from the region out of a major destination market. And I think we heard it earlier today, it's estimated around 45 million bags that are currently imported into Europe. And this will happen unless major investments in massive traceability and satellite imagery are made in a very short period of time. And again, this is only possible if the effort is collective, meaning if everybody along the supply chain understands the importance and understands that this is a shared effort and that it needs to be financed by all market participants. I don't think this can be expected to come from the farming community alone. But as everything in life, there's not just doom and gloom. And I think there are quite a few examples that show that a smart approach to face challenges can yield some very positive and tangible results as well. African coffees are widely known and distinguished for their premium qualities, and the focus of many farmers on producing high-quality coffee has resulted in a clear differentiation of those coffees from the rest of the world, and it has resulted in premiums paid well above the rest of the world. Staying true to your heritage and focusing on special varieties that are native to the region, varieties that actually work best together with the existing terroir, has proven to be another success story, which is once again reflected in the premiumization of high-quality coffee from East Africa and the prices the world market is willing to pay for them. And it's not only that, it's also transfer of that knowledge into other regions, because as we all know, some of those varieties have conquered the world of specialty and are nowadays considered to be at the top of all varieties by most of the special community, with almost every producing country trying to promote these incredible varieties. And when you move to the other side of the spectrum, of the coffee market, and you understand changing consumer needs and preferences, and you adapt to those changes in a quick fashion, that helps the region to maintain global relevance and market share with consuming countries. And the shift in Tanzania and Uganda that I mentioned before towards the increase of Robusta production is, in my mind, a clear example of that agility and has certainly yielded very positive results. So knowing your strengths and weaknesses is always key to success, and doubling down on where you can differentiate yourself or where you have a competitive advantage will ultimately help driving financial improvement on a larger scale. Converting unwashed and ungraded qualities into different and better qualities, oftentimes at scale, is generating more and more stable income for farming communities, which ultimately drive progress. One great example of this differentiation and premiumization are the efforts in Ethiopia to convert unwashed Jimas into washed lima qualities, which currently have a differential delta of over 50 cents per pound. To me, that is a clear sign that differentiation and premiumization matters and pays off in the long run. Access to market is key, and unfortunately, the smaller the farmland per farmer, the more difficult it is to get that access, especially if farmers are unorganized. So getting organized into cooperatives and farmer groups has been instrumental in providing better market access to millions of farmers in the region. And it has allowed farmers to use collective resources more wisely to ultimately elevate the living standards of farmers and their communities. And finally, it is important to create a connection with consumers and customers alike, a connection that consumers can relate to. East Africa as a whole has been very successful in creating that bond through various avenues. And the success is seen through a major preference towards the African coffees and their farming communities when it comes to the vast majority of European coffee consumers. Because of compelling stories, a connection is built, and a generic, normal European customer will always favor coffee from the African continent over anything else. This ultimately drives loyalty and results in stable and recurring business. So like many other regions, the future of coffee production in East Africa is subject to several trends and challenges, including those related to climate change, sustainability, market dynamics, and more importantly, to evolving consumer preferences. So when we're looking ahead, I would like to comment on some key considerations on what is important to secure a sustainable future of coffee production in East Africa. East African coffee-producing countries, as mentioned, are expected to continue facing the impacts of climate change, including shifts in temperature and rainfall patterns, prolonged droughts, and increased susceptibility to pests and diseases. So adaptation strategies such as planting shade trees, adopting drought-resistant coffee varieties, and exploring new processing methods will be crucial for future viability. We also know that sustainability in the coffee supply chain is gaining importance by the day. Farmers need to increasingly adopt environmentally friendly practices, which includes, but is not limited to, soil analysis at scale, applying good agricultural practices with the appropriate amount of fertilizer, applying regenerative agroforestry, and work with a proper waste management, all towards the ultimate effort to enhance the long-term viability of coffee production. And in that context, technology will become one of the most important drivers for change. And the adoption of modern agricultural technologies, including mobile apps for farm management and digital payment systems, can and will enhance efficiency, transparency, and productivity in the coffee supply chain. We've spoken a lot about certifications, but certifications around social and environmental requirements will continue to be important for market access and for long-term sustainability. The entire coffee supply chain needs to continue to invest in meeting these standards to access premium markets and to comply with the multiple regulations that are already on the horizon in many destination markets. And for example, again, I hate to talk so much about it, but investing in EUDR compliance and getting ahead of the curve will be a game changer for any coffee producing country. So please do not take the EUDR lightly. It's going to be an important thing for the future. It's going to be with us, and I think we will all need to work much, much harder to get compliant in that space. And lastly, continued and coordinated investment in coffee research and development is essential to develop disease-resistant varieties, to improve overall yields, and to adapt to the overall changing conditions. East Africa is renowned for producing high-quality Arabica coffee, and this trend is likely to continue. But in the long run, this might not be enough, and the region will need to continue to constantly reinvent itself to stay relevant in the global context. Specialty coffee, with its unique flavor profiles and traceability approach, is expected to remain a focus for many East African producers to capture premium prices in the global market. But the example of Tanzania and Uganda have shown that countries that quickly adapt to changing consumption patterns and expand into different varieties and qualities will prevail in the long run, as they are able to tackle upcoming challenges much better due to the diversification of their portfolio. The region also needs to further expand its market access, especially for smallholder farmers, strengthening cooperative organizations and improving access to international markets through strategic partnerships with like-minded trade houses and roasters can help East Africa coffee farmers gain more access and ultimately receive better prices for their products. Attracting younger generations to coffee farming will be important for the continuity of the industry, and efforts to make coffee farming more appealing and more profitable, as well as providing training and resources, will be essential. Coffee-producing countries may also increase their focus on value addition, including roasting and packaging for regional purposes, so that they are able to capture a larger share of the value chain and export higher value coffee products, while at the same time reducing the global carbon footprint. And lastly, the governments in East Africa must continue to play an active and critical role in providing supportive policies, infrastructure, financial resources, all with the goal to promote the coffee sector's growth and sustainability. So the ultimate goal and the top priority really of all the above is to build resilience among coffee farmers and their communities so that they can withstand climate-related shocks and market volatility, so that ultimately there is hopefully a prosperous, long-living, and above all, sustainable future of coffee for the region, the farmers, their families, and the communities that they live in. And before I finish, please allow me to make one final comment. The future of coffee does not sit with the producers alone. I strongly believe that all stakeholders, including but not limited to the roasting industry, need to get much more involved to support a diversified portfolio of origins and flavors for the years to come. I don't think it can be in the interest of the industry to limit themselves to 2 or 3 countries when it comes to the sourcing of coffee. And I don't think it can be in the interest of the final consumer to only get taste differentiation in their final blend product through a difference in the roast curve for the same underlying blend components. I believe that we all have a responsibility to support the diversity of origins, irrespective of where we sit in the global supply chain. And I think it is about time that we remove our differences and start working together towards a successful, profitable, and sustainable future of the coffee industry as a whole. So with that, thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to connecting with you over the next week.